So, hey everyone, thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Recruitment Reality Podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Mike from Haystack. Mike was introduced to me by a guy called David Roddy. Thank you, David. You are such an amazing asset to have as just part of the network, so enthusiastic about everything we do. So I appreciate you making the intro to Mike. Rather than me giving you an intro, Mike, and trying to talk about Haystack in any great detail, it would be amazing to hear more from you about Haystack and the journey that you've gone through to get to where you are today.
Great. Yep, sounds good. Hello, everybody. I'm Mike. I'm the co-founder and COO here at Haystack. In a former life, I used to be a software engineer, which is kind of the route that took me down starting Haystack as a business. So essentially, what does Haystack do? Is probably a good starting point. We're a tech insights and careers marketplace built for techies, essentially. So in very, very shorthand, we connect software engineers, data scientists, designers with tech employers. Think kind of TripAdvisor for the tech scene. As I mentioned, in a former life, I used to be a software engineer, which is kind of where I got the idea for Haystack from. It's a common rhetoric across the market now that software engineers and tech professionals are kind of treated as a commodity, specifically by recruitment agencies who tend to see software engineers as just kind of having a fee attached to their head. And as a result, it's opened the market up to a lot of shady practices. So constant spam messaging on LinkedIn, irrelevant emails left, right, and center, dodgy job boards, and that was kind of where we wanted Haystack to step in. So Haystack is a completely unbiased platform for tech professionals. You're free to go in there and browse. We kind of wanted to build TripAdvisor for the tech scene. So in the same way that you would use TripAdvisor to find a quirky, cool restaurant in London, you should be able to use Haystack to uncover who's using React in Manchester, what are the up-and-coming fintech startups, who's the next big CTO player in the region, and really give you the tools to uncover, explore, and discover the tech scene.
Awesome. I've not heard of an organization like yours ever trying to emulate the TripAdvisor sort of model, I guess, because it's kind of a combination between a job board, Glassdoor, and I guess those two things really.
Yep.
What's different about Haystack that means you're getting the best kind of candidates and the best organizations coming through your platform?
Yeah. Well, one of the kind of core tenets that we started Haystack around was essentially this kind of idea that the candidate is king or queen. Essentially, we wanted to build the best possible candidate experience. So we started with, if we can attract tech talent to Haystack, we can build an ecosystem and a community that they want to be around, then naturally the business side will follow. So that's really where we started. Let's build something that techies actually genuinely want to use. And to be honest, it's not particularly difficult to beat what's currently out there. So again, if you put yourself in a software engineer's shoes, like what I did and what I was, being on platforms like LinkedIn, for example, and having a job title as a software engineer is just an open invitation for spam messaging. And it wasn't just me; it was all of my colleagues. Everybody's kind of turning their backs on that platform. You don't really get an accurate snapshot of what's out there because you just get peppered with messages from recruitment agencies. And then on the other side of things, you've got job boards, so platforms like Indeed and Reed and those kind of players, where it's just kind of endless scrolling, black and white text,
boring,
very little context. Yeah,
boring,
extremely boring. And I think one of the challenges is with job boards especially is it's basically pay to win. Whereas what I wanted when I was doing my job search as a software engineer, and whether talent acquisition teams like to admit it or not, the techies are the ones that hold the cards in today's market because they're so in demand. So as a techie, I kind of had the luxury of of being able to browse on my own terms. So I really wanted the tools to essentially browse the entire tech scene without being bombarded by random messages from recruiters. I wanted to find who was using, which companies were using specifically my tech stack, who was working on cool, interesting products, what was the culture like at the business, what opportunities for progression did I have at that business, and really just be able to sit back, relax, and do research on my own terms, without essentially being strong-armed into applying for a position like you would if you typically used a recruitment agency, for example. So in that sense, like I said, there's a lot of areas which, in my opinion, when you're doing a job search as a tech candidate, there's a lot of areas that needed fixing. So there's probably quite a bit to unpack from that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that needs fixing in most of recruitment, and apathy has led to not fixing it for a very long time. But how do you think? There is a lot to unpack there, but the question in my mind, obviously, you're talking about at the moment tech talent being in high demand, and they are the queen or king of who they go to. Obviously, everybody's talking about this apparent recession that is upon us. How do you see things changing over the next 6 to 12 months in your world?
Well, interestingly, so when I started Haystack, our first employee started day one of lockdown, and everybody thought that was kind of, doom and gloom. Essentially, you're reading all the headlines was everybody's getting fired, everybody's been furloughed, but actually, off the back of it, tech came off stronger than ever. So it's very, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's very, very difficult, I think, to make predictions. One of the challenges around all of these articles coming out around recession is it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, in my opinion. Everybody talks about a recession, so everybody starts fearing a recession, so everybody starts to panic, so hiring freezes kick in, there's uncertainty around budgets. So it's very difficult to tell, I guess, without being obviously I'm not a market analyst at the end of the day. But that being said, the world has to keep turning, and great techies, people are still going to need great techies. So yeah, I think yes, it will continue to be a competitive market. The power dynamic might flip slightly. People might start sticking around in the current role for a bit longer than they used to, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a short-term play. I think the overall tech market is only going in one direction. So yes, there might be a recession in the short term, but you've got to kind of have a 5 to 10 year mindset on this thing.
I think it's really interesting, and I'm no Mystic Meg, if anybody remembers Mystic Meg, but showing my age. But I think the reality is the tech juggernauts that have been overfunded are shrinking because they're unprofitable. They forecasted growth that was unachievable once the pandemic, doors had kind of opened again.
Yeah.
But I think what probably is likely to happen is that more traditional businesses will, if there is more available tech talent, then they are likely to invest more in their own technology and actually finding ways to improve their business, as opposed to, everybody being sucked into the SaaS ecosystem, basically. So I do think demand will definitely remain high, but I actually think you might see a different, the direction from which that demand is coming is maybe different. But
interestingly, I think just on that as well, I think what we will see is, so yes, hiring freezes might occur for those businesses like you say that are burning cash, but those that are cash rich, i.e., the Apples of the world, the Microsofts of the world, this is when they jump in and start sweeping up all the best talent that's available on the market.
And the best businesses.
They're sitting on piles of cash, and it's a perfect opportunity for them to sweep up.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally. I totally agree, and I think most of the jobs that are being laid off at the moment they're either like warehouse, so it's like Amazon getting rid of people, pickers and packers, because things have slowed down because people are suddenly going to shops again, or it's salespeople. It's growth fuelers, not technology fuelers, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, definitely. I think the businesses that we have seen where there've been significant redundancies made are the likes of consumer businesses like Klarna, for example, where clearly massively overbloated as a result of the pandemic, where everybody was online shopping, using e-commerce platforms. So they clearly had to grow with that or scale up to meet the demand. But now there's been a reversion to norm, essentially. So that could be a factor as well, to be honest.
Yeah, interesting. Well, let's not fuel the fire of recession chat as two startup founders in the recruitment world. We don't want to talk about it too much. I just don't think it's, like you say, people talk themselves into it, and it's more than anything. It's usually the population sentiment that drives a recession or not, because it's whether they're going to the shops. So there's going to be no recession. We're all going to be fine.
Yeah, that's a positive outlook.
What's been the biggest, just in terms of like breaking through to tech talent and getting their attention? And I think some of our listeners will be able to learn something from like how to cut through the Indeeds of the world who've got massive marketing budgets, and it is pay-per-click job advertising. What have you done as a business to kind of cut through that, get past it, and start to build, a steady stream of tech talent coming to your platform?
Yeah, that was one of the focuses from day one, was how do we build a reproducible, what you would call a B2C acquisition model, so the user acquisition model. It all comes down, or all initially came down to strong messaging. I think it was beneficial that I'd kind of been there, done that, got the t-shirt, in the sense that I'd lived and breathed it. So I felt like I knew a lot of the pain points that techies went through, like, the constant spam messaging, irrelevant job listings, just recruiters that had no understanding of programming languages or the kind of roles that you'd be looking for. So essentially, how can you pick out those pain points and drive a knife through them a little bit with messaging? So that was one of the focuses, specifically when we ran ad campaigns, for example. And that was kind of how we got the ball rolling initially. So can you acquire users with this strong messaging that hones in on pain points? And then once you've got those users bought into the platform and using the product, can you then start leveraging those guys for their own networks, essentially? So we found that a lot of people really liked using Haystack and used Haystack, or are using Haystack over a lot of the big players now. We recently ran a survey across our entire user base, and I think we had around 500 respondents, and 90% of them said they'd refer us to a friend or already had referred us to a friend. So on top of that, we built a referral program just to basically light a fire under it. So I guess the first challenge is cutting through the noise, creating some messaging that actually resonates with your target audience, i.e. tech professionals. But then once you've got them bought in, can you start driving those network effects with things like referral programs and leveraging your user base's network?
Yeah. And it's that the idea of the first follower, which I'm a big fan of. You get one lone nutter joins Haystack.
That's it.
Gets a job, and then his mate sees him do it. It's his mate that gets everybody else to do it, because one person isn't credible, but two starts to be like, oh, maybe this is something.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You've kind of got the early adopter bell curve, haven't you, where it's you get the crazy people at the start who are willing to try something out, and it's going to have a load of bugs, and that's just the way it is. But they're so fed up with the norm and the standard way of doing things that they're just willing to give it a punt. And we really kind of honed in on that. So we actually, in our initial messaging when we first launched the product, we'd be completely frank and just say, we know we've got bugs. We're all developers. You're developers. You kind of understand the product cycle. Be part of the journey with us. Let us know when you find bugs. We'll give you shout outs. We'll send you some swag, that kind of thing. So it's kind of how can you bring those crazy early adopters on the journey with you? And I think people really value that transparency as well. Especially, obviously, we are talking about a techie audience, so they know how it is to build a product. So there's no point kind of hiding behind the bugs and pretending that they don't exist. It's kind of in the early stages. Can you own up to it, and can you leverage your audience to sort of get behind it and believe more in the idea rather than the actual execution in the early days?
Yeah, absolutely. And so tell me more about, because I obviously did a bit of research. I believe, was the business born out of an accelerator? Did you go into the accelerator with an idea? What's the history there, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I did. So I was initially part of the Ignite Accelerator program. So prior to that, I was a software engineer. Well, actually, prior to that, I was a mobile app developer at Newcastle Uni, which is kind of where the app background comes from. After that, I knew I very much wanted to sort of enter the startup ecosystem. So I joined a company in Newcastle that was kind of pre-Series A, went through Series A and a few big funding rounds with those guys. And then that was kind of where I identified the problem from a B2B side of things as well. So the organization that I worked for was a company called Hive, not the heating.
Not the heating.
No, not the heating company. They do employee engagement software. So it's essentially can you survey your employees, find out how happy they are essentially.
Like a Peakon alternative kind of
thing.
thing.
Exactly, like Peakon or Culture Amp. So yeah, I worked there, and I remember we went through all of these funding cycles, and I actually specifically remember the CEO was like one of those late night kind of coding stints, and he said, one of the hardest things about scaling a SaaS business is putting bums on seats, and that was sort of what got me thinking from a business perspective. Anyways, how can a company like Hive, who has this really cool kind of tech for good product essentially, with a great culture, modern technology, cutting edge tech stack, great company leadership,
money in the bank.
How can they struggle to hire tech talent? And whether they like to hear it or not, it was basically because nobody had heard of them. So nobody had heard of Hive. And then the first thing that they do is they kind of run to the local recruitment agent, and you're raising this big round of money, and then almost instantly it's kind of going out in recruitment fees. Like I said, so that was kind of what got the ball rolling, and I joined the Ignite Accelerator, which kind of gave me a little bit of very, very early stage funding, just to sort of develop the idea. I think that initially, like I said, it was very much just an idea in my head. So how can you kind of bring this idea to fruition and sort of prove traction in the market? So I just started a newsletter to see if I could get some signups. Literally just talking about interesting tech opportunities, quirky startups, places that you might not have heard of, and just sort of bringing organizations like Hive sort of into the fray and introducing it to the tech community. And through that, I met our current lead investor, Dan, who had a very similar idea to me, and was talking to Chris, who was the other co-founder, who was also talking to Rob, who's my other co-founder. And those guys were basically working on exactly the same idea as I was. So we were like, right,
in Ignite as well, in the same accelerator.
They weren't in Ignite, but they were based up in Newcastle. So it was like, right, well, we can either be direct competitors, or
or come together
we can put all of our eggs in one basket and have a crack at it together. So that was kind of where we got the initial seed funding from, which is obviously Dan, our lead investor, and then Chris and Rob came on board as well.
Amazing. I've always wondered what it would be like to be in an accelerator program, but that's probably something for another time. But because I remember I did some NatWest pre-accelerator thing.
I know the one.
It's quite interesting. But I don't know. Do you think Ignite really helped you
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
ignite the business? God,
Yeah,
that's so
yeah, it really
tragically
did.
cliche, but
It, I don't think I would have had the confidence to quit my job without having that initial bit of funding. It wasn't very much at all. It was enough to pay yourself a basic living wage, and then invest in a few kind of crazy ideas that you had.
yeah,
So yeah, it kind of gave me the confidence to leave the job, but also networking at that stage is absolutely vital. Um,
mm,
you can't just sort of sit on an idea and let it sort of gather dust in your head. You need to get it out there and get it out into the wild and start speaking to your target audience, and only then do you actually realize if it has legs or not.
mm,
And you kind of figure out the quirks and a few things that you might have in your head as an idea. Maybe they don't have legs, but another area might crop up. So I think just having that support network, plus speaking to potential customers at the time, and just getting the idea out there, was massively useful. Otherwise, I think I would have just sat on it and probably wouldn't have went anywhere.
yeah, yeah. I think again, it's having the courage of your own conviction sometimes, but
Yeah, a little bit of naivety and yeah, definitely naivety. Actually, it's it's yeah.
I
Everybody's
think
build it and everybody will come. It's easy as that, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. It's that. Yeah, why not? There's thousands. Well, my co-founder Ewan, he always talks about the fact that there's thousands of companies on Product Hunt that are
Yeah,
absolutely
yep,
incredible.
yeah,
Incredible things, but nobody knows that they exist
yep.
except for the Product Hunt community. So
That's
there's
it.
literally no point. There's no business. It's
Yeah,
just a great idea.
yeah,
But I think as a founder myself, the reality is that at every point you suddenly realise how naive you were about something, until
yeah,
the point probably when you either sell your business or you float it or whatever happens
mm,
in the long term. So
yeah, definitely.
it's an incredibly humbling experience, or it has been for me anyway.
Yeah,
So
agreed.
back to sort of recruitment focused side of things.
Mm.
What's the what kind of organizations are using Haystack, and what's the feedback that you get from them, versus their other kind of talent channels?
Um, so the first question: what kind of organisations are using Haystack? Everybody from small up and coming startup to FTSE 100 companies. Um, and that was very much deliberate, to be honest. So I wanted organizations like Hive, for example, to feel like they could have a presence on Haystack. Um, it's we wanted to be whole of market. I think, as I mentioned, if when I talked about my experience as a software engineer going through a job hunt, I wanted to see everything that was out there. I didn't just want to see the big names who paid the biggest budgets just to get the top spot on Indeed. We wanted everybody. But what's interesting is the challenges are very different depending on obviously the size and scale of the business. So a lot of the times, these kind of big organizations, they don't necessarily have. So when I mentioned Hive, nobody had heard of them. Obviously, these big organizations don't have that challenge. A lot
Mm,
of people have heard of them, but the perception around their organization
mm,
is often a little bit skewed, from a techies perspective, anyway. Um, so I'll take Sage for example, because they're a big employer up in the northeast,
yeah,
and actually
absolutely
they're doing
huge.
yeah they do a lot of really cool stuff. But the perception in the tech community is that it's a bit of a job for life kind of shirt and tie
Yeah,
accountancy legacy software. But actually within Sage, there's some really cool kind of almost like startup like ecosystems that are building really interesting products.
mm,
So can you bring that into the fray and start talking about that? On platforms like Haystack, for example, because that's the stuff that's how you get in front of this techie audience, and that's how you get typically younger people, or maybe almost like the new generation of tech talent moving into the business. Um,
mm,
but again, on the flip side, kind of lower down the chain for these maybe pre-Series A / Series A companies, the challenge is more around, let's introduce this name to the tech scene. Let's put your brand front and center. Let's talk about this quirky, cool, interesting product that you're building. What kind of tech stack that you're working on. And again, really the challenge there is more brand awareness rather than brand perception.
Yeah. Why do you think it is that tech talent? I mean, maybe this is a really stupid question, because I would want to work on like the bleeding edge if I was a techie person. But why is it that tech talent, to me, most tech individuals that we speak to, they all seem to want to work in a kind of startup, scale up environment, mainly startup actually, because they think they're going to get in early. It's going to be cool tech. It's going to be bleeding edge, etc., etc. But where do you think that comes from? Like that perception that working in a startup's really good, because a lot of what you have to do in a startup is actually really quite bloody boring.
And hard graphs.
Exactly.
A lot of hard
exactly.
graphs. I think it depends, to be honest. Maybe that's because the circle that you were in is very much the startup kind of circle.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know a lot of people who are quite happy sat at a company like Accenture, for example, huge consultancy, pay very well, bit of a job for life, really good benefits. So I think it just depends on maybe the stage of life that you're at. Some people are more risk averse and are looking for those bigger organizations that have a healthy paycheck at the end of it and a nice employee benefits. Some people are less risk averse and are willing to take a punt on a startup that might not be here in 2 years, but if it does absolutely fly, then you could be massively accelerating your career progression.
Yeah, and wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you get options.
Yeah, that's it.
And what kind of demographic is typically using Haystack? Is it the younger generations looking for something different, or are you challenging the status quo of those more experienced candidates too?
It depends. What's interesting is it very much depends on the user journey. So younger people do quite like to be able to kind of go out there, browse the entire tech scene, see what's out there, see who's doing what. But what's interesting is now that platforms like Stack Overflow Jobs doesn't exist. So I don't know if you were familiar with Stack Overflow Jobs, but they don't exist anymore. So there's a big void that was kind of left by that company. The subset of Stack Overflow no longer existing. So what we're finding is a lot of senior people are now moving towards Haystack and using Haystack as kind of a tool to just let employers come to them. So initially, when we built Haystack, we were very much of the impression that all techies want to be anonymous until they apply for a role, for example. But actually, we found that especially senior people actually quite like to almost sit back, relax, and just let employers come to them, provided it's not a recruitment agent. They want to
that's
direct
interesting.
from employers. So we built this feature called Headhunt, which is kind of an extension of Haystack, essentially. So as a user, you can sign up. You can choose to be completely anonymous, where you can browse, see what's out there, check out the tech scene, kind of that TripAdvisor user journey, or you can make yourself visible. And we'll kind of reverse match you against employers that are also using Headhunt, who can then go and cherry pick techies from the Haystack user base. And what we're finding is we're getting a lot of CTO, head of engineering, type seniority levels who are actually using Headhunt because of that void that Stack Overflow Jobs has left.
That's really interesting. I think the most interesting thing about what you said there is the adversity to recruitment agents, and there's obviously lessons to be learned on both sides. Like, one, if you're an organization that's struggling to hire tech talent, make sure that you're finding a way to tap into the community directly and have like credible, trustworthy conversations. And two, if you're a recruitment agency, you're really pissing off tech talent to the point where they're looking for alternatives. So you've got to start trying something different, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's these practices that recruitment agencies kind of have employed in the past, and they probably have worked because they wouldn't be doing it otherwise. it's kind of wearing thin, I think, with the tech community. A lot of people are now just completely turning their backs on like I say, LinkedIn, which was typically the channel that a lot of these spam messages would get sent out via. So yeah, you might find a software engineer on LinkedIn, but the likelihood of them actually responding to you is probably quite slim, to be honest.
Yeah, interesting. That is a big learn, for organizations. Like, you're better off investing in communities or technology or platform that people have a community around than you are, trying to get a quick fix necessarily through an agency. But obviously, I'm from agency world, not tech agency, but it does work. The techniques do work. You spam enough people, one will respond.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's a numbers game, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's almost like it's a self-fulfilling loop, basically. There's always this really high demand for tech talent has basically caused a massive surge in all of these sort of shady practices employed by recruitment agencies, which has meant there's been kind of a gold rush for techies. But as a result, everybody started turning their backs on it, and it's just became white noise.
Yeah. Well, and your shortlists are getting shorter when maybe you could tap into something where people are representing themselves, and you can get more options. Okay, look, this has been really interesting. I could talk about it for a lot longer, but it would be really great if you could share some of your experience. I guess both as I wouldn't say fairly recent, but in the last 4 years. Or what is it, 6 years now since you left university, right?
Yep.
In the last 6 years, as before you founded the business, how do you think employers can hire more tech talent? And then now, seeing the market as it is, what would be your top, your kind of top tips to employers?
So first question, how can employers hire more tech talent? Was it?
Yeah, I guess from a candidate's perspective, like literally looking at it through the lens of what drove you to set up the business, what do you think people should learn or take away from that?
Well, I think the key is you need to find a way, as an employer anyway, you need to find a way to directly engage the tech community. And without immediately plugging Haystack, that's kind of
it sounds like they need Haystack.
It does. It's convenient, that, isn't it?
Yeah, very.
Yeah, but I think directly engaging the tech community, you kind of have to. The techies are very different to hiring a marketer or someone in CS, for example, and their experiences as a job seeker is very, very different, like very different. So the old way of doing things, sticking something up on Indeed, sticking a few qualifying questions on there, doesn't make the cut. You're just going to get inundated with random applications from warehouse workers. You need to start putting yourself out there, talking about what you're doing as a business, talking about the product that you're going to be building or are building, talking about the tech stack, the engineering values, what it's like to be part of the tech team. That's the kind of stuff. That transparency is what the tech community value. Because, like I said, whether the talent acquisition person likes to hear or not, the techies are the ones that kind of have the power. The power dynamic is very different when you're talking to tech talent, because they have the luxury of choice. So on your side of things, transparency is key. You need to think about ways to put your best foot forward. I think if I was talking to a job seeker coming straight out of university, I don't think people realize, especially when they're leaving a computer science degree, just how valuable you are.
Yeah, absolutely not. I totally agree. They got no idea.
Yeah, that's it, and it's kind of this absolute dread of entering the market, but employers are bending over backwards now to hire the best tech talent. It's kind of, at first we saw ping pong tables and beer fridges as an employee benefit, and people laugh about it, but the reason for that is because everybody wanted to win the talent war. Now we're seeing super flexi working environments. Everybody's going remote. 4-day work weeks. Again, it's kind of quirky to talk about, but the reasons that people are putting this in place is because they want to win the talent war. And I think tech, and specifically tech workers, are the driving force behind a lot of that.
I think the easiest way that I would describe it is like, if a company looks like it gives a shit about tech talent, it probably does. Like if you look at a company, and for example, they're getting involved in Manchester Tech Festival, they're doing speeches at it. They're investing time, money into engaging with the community, not just putting stuff on Indeed, not just engaging with a recruitment agent. They're actually pouring back their expertise into the community around them.
That's it.
You can clearly see that, and if I was a grad, I'd be getting along to those events. I'd be getting on communities. I'd be getting on platforms like your own, and I would be trying to figure out who are the genuine businesses that actually, they could be massive, but if they're involved in something like Manchester Tech Festival, they're probably quite entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial organisations. So it's just keeping an eye out and really listening and getting that feedback. And I think
that's a very good point. Being part of those networking events and kind of community events, it's huge, especially in the early days of your career. That's where you start to build your network, and that's where you kind of start to meet potential colleagues, start to get introductions to, like you said, the businesses that actually care about nurturing tech talent. And from there, you can start to connect the dots, I think.
Absolutely. If you ever go to an interview and you say, what networking events do you get involved with? How do you feel about me leaving, for the day to go to a networking event? And they say, no, we don't really do any of that. Don't work there.
Red flag.
Big red flag. But anyway, so Mike, it's been awesome to have you on. Great to meet you, actually, for the
likewise.
first time. So this is the first conversation we've ever had. But if anybody does want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to get in contact?
So after bashing LinkedIn for probably 35 minutes now, you can add me on LinkedIn. It's a good route.
It's the best way to connect.
Yeah.
If you want to connect.
Yeah, that's it. If it's a genuine response and not a spam message about a potential job, then I'm happy to hear it.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. And to all the listeners, thank you for listening. And don't forget to subscribe. I got told off by my dad. His feedback was, you don't ask your audience to subscribe. I was like, thanks, Dad. That's really useful. So everybody, please subscribe to the podcast and have a good week.
Cheers.